Hello lovely people, my name's Eden, this is Tallulah, and today we're going to discuss taking birds outside, how people do that, and why you may choose to do so. How to take a bird outside is, like most things in the pet world, a hotly contested subject. My goal is to give you a good idea of what the benefits and negatives are to each method. While we discuss this, I urge you to keep in mind that since this is something that involves individual people, animals, and environments, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Just do your best to make an informed decision that you feel good about. Now, the most important part of this discussion is why take them outside at all? What are some reasons to and not to take your bird outdoors? There are lots of benefits to taking birds outside. We're going to start with light. Daily full-spectrum UV light exposure is important for a bird's overall health, vitamin D absorption, and the health of their eyes. Another reason is exercise. Exercise is essential to maintaining birds' overall health, especially avoiding obesity. Some methods of taking birds outside provide great exercise. Taking birds outside provide a good opportunity for socialization. This helps with the overall socialization that you want in a bird to be a balanced individual. It also helps with their overall behavior when they're more confident and comfortable around new people. When it comes to providing enrichment, outside is unbeatable when it comes to variation in color, sounds, landscape, and general intrigue. I've also found taking birds outside helps prevent phobias and makes them more confident overall. Another benefit is reduced exposure to toxins and air pollution. Birds' superpower of having an extremely effective respiratory system comes with the downside that they are very susceptible to being harmed by air pollution, which unfortunately is most air in most buildings. The EPA has found that the air quality inside of a building or house is typically 2 to 5 times worse than the air outside, and it can get up to 100 times worse. I'll put an example of the kinds of air pollutions that can be common in houses somewhere on the screen. The important part is that typically you will have better quality air outside than you do inside, even if you live in somewhere with not amazing air quality. So getting them outside to have clean air available to them, or cleaner air available to them, could be very beneficial. On the flip side, what are some reasons why you would choose not to take your bird outside? The first one is danger. When outside, there is an increased chance of a bird getting lost or injured. Another reason you might not want to take your bird outside is stress. Some birds have phobias of the outdoors, and if it's an old bird who's never been outside, it may take a very long time of gentle progression in order for them to be comfortable with that. Care must be taken to make sure that they don't overheat or get too cold whenever you're outside, and this includes even a brief trip from your house to your car if you're taking it to the vet. Pathogens. A bird's potential to be exposed to diseases or pests are increased when they're outside and are potentially around other birds. Toxins. Birds are at an increased risk of accidentally consuming a poisonous plant or insect when they're outside. Theft. Some bird species are very valuable, and some humans try and steal valuable things. Impulse buys. You must be ready to effectively answer questions in a way that helps impress upon people the realities of bird parenthood to deter them from going out and buying a bird without understanding the commitment. So if you think you'd like to take your bird outside sometimes, let's discuss the different methods that you do that and their pros and cons. First of all, carriers, strollers, and backpacks. I'm just going to say carrier the whole time because they all function virtually the same. Carriers are by far the safest way to take a bird outside. That said, they are not foolproof, and I do know people who have lost their bird when they weren't secured properly, or who have had their bird injured by an animal attacking the carrier when they weren't able to intervene. I'm just going to read the pros and cons off my list because then we'll get through more efficiently. Pros. Pretty safe way to be outside, constant supervision and protection, access to food and water at all times, access to natural light and fresh air, stimulation and enrichment, protection from loss and attack, provides security for most nervous birds, low chance of exposure to pathogens and parasites, and relatively affordable. On to cons. Still a risk of loss if carrier is not secure, risk of injury from predators if carrier is not secured / supervised, risk of overheating if it is not hot and carrier doesn't have adequate ventilation, no exercise potential. Next, we'll discuss aviaries. Keep in mind that with aviaries, the better quality, the higher the rewards and the lower the risks. A well-made aviary can almost entirely eliminate the risks involved with putting a bird in an aviary. Okay, pros. Unprecedented access to full spectrum light and fresh air. Access to natural weather and light cycles. Lots of space, company. It's not usually recommended to keep a bird outdoors in an aviary completely alone, especially for long periods of time, or if they're living there full time. So if you have a bird living in an aviary for large periods of time, it's likely that they have a flock or a friend. Lots of space for enrichment, bird safe live plants, huge climbing spaces, etc. Flying space / exercise. Visual and audio enrichment from being outdoors. Easy to clean. You can hose down a well-designed aviary. Reduce boredom and associated negative effects such as plucking, screaming, and aggression, etc.
I'm so sleepy. Hi. Mwah. You sleepy?
Cons. Reduced supervision. Simply put, you're not with them all the time. You'll probably be inside, they're outside. It's hard to know what's going on. They must be protected against small predators such as rodents, mustelids, and snakes. They must also be protected against large predators such as dogs, cats, raptors, bears, raccoons, foxes, skunks, bobcats, cougars, etc. It's important when designing or buying or building an aviary to keep in mind that you need to be able to protect them from both categories, as they require different forms of security. Humans are another risk, as they may try and either steal or release the trapped bird. If they don't know what's going on, then the bird could die. Elements. They must be protected from drastic change in weather conditions, such as storms, heat waves, things like that. Other birds. As I mentioned before, it's likely that if you have a bird living in an aviary, they probably have multiple, especially if it's full time, since they'd be too lonely otherwise. This does mean that if they were to fight between each other, it's less likely you'd notice in time to intervene. There's also an increased risk of exposure to pathogens and pests if wild birds were to land on, poop on, or just be around the aviary. And lastly, it is very expensive to build a well-constructed aviary. Next, we're going to cover harnesses. To be clear, not all harnesses are constructed equally. I'm only going to be referring to high-quality, well-made, properly used ones in this discussion. I'll provide a list of ones that I recommend in a later video. Pros. Potential to get exercise. Room to flap. Minimal risk of overheating. Significant reduction or chance of loss or injury. This isn't compared to if they were loose without being contained in any way, such as with clipped wings or fully flighted. Maximum exposure to beneficial full spectrum light and fresh air. Potential to safely interact with the new environments. Easier time meeting and interacting with new people / beneficial socialization. This is particularly good with a more confident bird that likes to interact with new people. A more nervous bird might do better in a kennel, because then they'll have their own space and they'll feel protected from strangers. Lastly, they are very affordable. Now for the cons. Risk of loss or injury if leash / harness is dropped or chewed through. This is really important. Leashes and harnesses. Leases. Wow, I'm having a hard time with that word. Leashes and harnesses must be checked before use every single time, especially if you have a hook bill. It can be hard to train a bird to use a harness, especially if you have an adult that's never seen one before. It is significantly easier for predators to access a bird who's wearing a harness instead of in a carrier. So you must be actively protecting them whenever they're out. Which comes into the next one, which necessitates being aware and paying attention to help protect birds from environmental dangers. Requires well-trained bird, as they have the potential to damage their surroundings, environment, or other people. Example, if you have them on your hand wearing a harness, they could actually bite someone, so you need to be ready to monitor those situations. Free flight. Whether or not to clip a bird's wings is a hotly contested subject that we will not be covering in this video. We're only discussing that in regards to taking a bird outdoors. A future video will be released discussing the to clip or not to clip debate. Now, to be clear, this pro and con list will only be in regards to birds that are professionally trained to free fly, not just a standard pet who has unclipped wings who's just being taken outdoors. So these are very much not the same thing. Pros. Unsurpassed exercise, natural activity, enrichment, highest level of training. This is a prerequisite to being able to train them to be free flighted. You're not going to have a poorly trained bird that's also magically fully trained to properly be free flighted. Health. As a result of being so physically fit, It is a significantly lower chance of many health problems, including obesity and fatty liver disease. Cons. High chance of losing a bird. This is one I feel like everyone is fully aware of. Even if a bird is extremely well trained, it's still high risk. High chance of bird being hurt or eaten. Bird could get enough momentum that hitting a window would likely cause significant injury. High chance of eating something toxic if they were to land and hang out not within reach of their human. High chance of being injured by a scared human, or legal repercussions for their human, unless they're specifically trained not to land on strangers. Free flying requires access to a large, open, relatively safe space. It's also relatively expensive. This may seem weird, but in order for a bird to be professionally trained, both them and the owner need that training, which is usually fairly costly. This next one is not a method that I hear people discuss very frequently, but it is used, so I wanted to cover it here. Jesses and other leg restraints. A jess is a piece of leather, typically, that is worn around. That is worn around a bird's leg/ankle, and is typically used in falconry. Some people also use metal versions of that with a chain attached, or if their bird has a leg band, they will attach a leash onto that leg band. All of those things are under the same umbrella of what we're going to be talking about here. That I do not recommend, regardless of the situations, at all, at any point. Purely because the way that jesses work is that even when they work exactly as intended, it is still very, very, very likely that your bird will be severely injured. Essentially, the original use for jesses being on raptors have significantly stronger leg muscles and thicker legs, thicker bones that make it so that they are able to have that pressure on their legs or fly to the end of the leash and get to have it come taunt without getting injured. I think they carry large prey around quite frequently. They're significantly stronger. On the other hand, most domestic birds you will see, or you'll have potential to have as a pet or a companion, those do not. They have significantly thinner, more delicate bones, less musculature. This includes even the largest parrots. They do not naturally use their legs for anything other than climbing and hopping, which does not require a lot of strength, so their legs are not very strong. This makes it so that if a non-raptor bird gets to the end of a jess, it will likely shatter their leg or dislocate it or break their foot. Honestly, if you wish to take your bird out, not in a cage, I 100% recommend harnesses over any form of leg restraint, because the harnesses are designed to evenly disperse the pressure if they come to the end of the rope to not injure them. The best ones even have an elasticized leash to absorb even more of that impact. You already know the gists of that, but I'm going to do the pros and cons anyway, just to stay consistent. Pros, it is convenient. That's it. That's the only pro. Convenient for the handler. Cons. Companion birds, both parrots and softbills, don't have the needed strength, musculature, or bone structures to not become severely injured. Breaking or dislocating a leg if pulled taunt is extremely likely. A high chance of someone tethering them. The image that we often have in our head of a large parrot wearing a metal anklet with a chain attached, chained to a T-perch. That is something that some people still do. That is a perfect example of it being very dangerous. If that bird were to jump off or fall off, they will become severely injured. Tethering leaves the bird very vulnerable to getting eaten because they're not being adequately protected, especially if they're outdoors. Additionally, if they jump off, they could end up hanging. If they're wearing anklets like that, especially that have pressure being put on them by them being on the end of a leash, there's a very high chance that their legs will be becoming injured just by the abrasions as well. So yeah, that one's over. Really could not recommend this any less. Last on the list is clipped wings. Once again, clipping wings, hotly contested subject. We're not really getting into that here. We're only talking about taking the bird outside, that being the only form of managing the situation. Another video will be made in the future discussing whether or not to clip wings and that whole entire world. But that's not for right now. Now this one's a little bit tricky because taking birds outside just as they are, only with clipped wings, is very popular and has pretty much always been very popular, which is unfortunate because what most people are not aware of is that it is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than taking a bird that is fully flighted outside. Let me explain. The biggest problem with this is that it provides the person with a completely false sense of security. They take them outside and assume that their bird is safe and secure to do that. Birds are completely able to fly or get blown up into the air, even with clipped wings when outdoors. But because of the false sense of security, there is a significant reduction in risk management, which usually if someone's going to take a flighted bird outside, they're aware of how incredibly dangerous that is. So they're not going to do it at all unless they are really confident in that bird's training and also willing to take that risk with that trained bird. When you have a clipped bird, it is unlikely that you're going to be aware or think about the amount of risk involved, which makes it so that the risk actually goes up. Onto the pro and con list, really it has the same problem of being convenient for the handler. It doesn't get any easier or cheaper to just cut the feathers off. Cheap, that was my other one. Easy and cheap. Unfortunately, it does not work at all. Cons. Despite popular understanding, clipped birds can fly or be blown away when outdoors. That's really not uncommon. As I mentioned before, clipped wings provide a false sense of security, which makes it so you're less careful, which makes it so it's more dangerous because you're being less cautious. The precautions and training needed to take a flighted bird outside are rarely done with a clipped bird because people assume that they don't have to do that, which is unfortunate because it's still applicable in that situation. Weak wing muscles increase the chance that they could simply be blown away as they will not have the strength to handle the wind. Especially if they have been clipped for a long period of time, their flight muscles can actually atrophy over time, which means that if they do get blown to the air, it's unlikely they would even be able to fly back down, even if they want to, because they have very little strength and control. They can't fight against the wind. Poor flying increases the chance of a bird falling to the ground and becoming prey to ground-based predators, being hit by a car, or breaking their keel. The keel is the bone right along their breast here, in between the two breast muscles. That is a very vulnerable spot to break if a bird falls. The bird is highly likely to become stuck on top of a building or in a high tree since they do not have the flight skills or knowledge to be recalled. They likely, since there is no intent for them to be free flying, it's unlikely. Most people don't have a bird that has been trained to have very good recall. And even if they did have recall, since their wings are clipped, they can't necessarily even fly down even if they want to or understand what recall is. So, very high chance of them getting stuck. When stuck out of reach, they may chew or ingest something that is toxic and poison themselves. Imagine a bird stuck on the roof of a building decides to chew the tar. I'm sure you're interested in birds. I'm sure you know why that's bad. Now, to be clear, I don't want anyone to feel attacked by me pointing out the dangers of taking a bird that's just clipped outside. I understand that it's really normalized and most people do it. I've done it myself in the past with birds when I was younger and I didn't know. I got lucky. Lots of people get lucky. But you don't want to rely on luck to keep your bird safe. It's much better to just put your clipped bird in a harness or in a carrier, something else. Combine something else. That way you're not relying on dumb luck to keep your bird safe. It's not worth the risk. If you want them to not be wearing anything, that could only be a very fit bird with extremely good professional flight training for outdoors, and not all birds are capable of doing that. That is like an entire separate complicated problem in and of itself, especially if that bird has been clipped for a long time. They might not even know how to fly properly. So after discussing all these different ways to take a bird outside, what did I choose to do with Tallulah? Yeah. For me, the decision was a balancing act between risk management and quality of life. For us, the best method ended up being to use a combination of carriers and harnesses. Carriers, if it's something where other people are involved, like if I'm taking her to the vet, especially since right now you can't go in with your animal to the vet, at least where I live, so she'll be in a carrier. That way a vet doesn't have to try and figure out how to take a harness off, because they might not know how, and that would freak her out.
Ooh, it's a big stretch. Good job.
Yeah. And I use harnesses whenever outside with her in a more relaxed situation. I'd also choose to use a carrier if I feel like I'm going to be more distracted and not able to be fully aware and protect her to like the best of my abilities. If I'm going to be outside with some friends and I know I'll be distracted, then she'll hang out in a carrier. That way she's extra safe and I'm not going to not notice that there's a hawk circling above. Now, I still use these methods which provide an extra level of security, even though she cannot actually fly. Because she still has her wings, there is always a chance that she could discover that she can actually fly somehow out of the blue and then get lost or hurt, killed. Or she could be simply blown into the air by a strong gust of wind. I've found that she is always significantly healthier, more active, more engaged, and she really enjoys it whenever we're in a space where she's able to go outside regularly. I hope this video has helped you figure out the best course of action for you and your bird, and I applaud you for taking the time to do research, as it's an important consideration, and you're off to a good start by taking the time to learn. There are sources and resources linked below that you are welcome to use to aid in your research. So what do you do? Let me know the way that you choose to take your bird outside, any past experiences that you've had, any warnings or advice. Maybe there's a different method of taking birds outside that I haven't thought of or included in this list. So drop in the comments below. I'm sure we'd all love to see. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you would like more bird content or just some more of Tallulah's cuteness, feel free to subscribe and ring the bell. Bye!